In this video, we'll talk about the general rules of probability. Now, we learned in Chapter 10 that there are 4 probability rules. The first one is that any probability is between 0 and 1 inclusive. The second one is that if you add up the probabilities of everything that can happen, you'll get 1. The third one is that events are disjoint if they have no outcomes in common, and if they're disjoint, the probability of one or the other is the sum of their individual probabilities. And the last one is the probability that something doesn't occur is 1 minus the probability that it does occur. So let's look at this Venn diagram for what disjoint events look like. If you look in the one on the left, you'll see that A and B don't overlap at all. So the probability of one or the other was just adding them up. The two events in the Venn diagram on the right are not disjoint. They have a place that overlaps where both of them happen. Okay, so there's an event A and B that they have in common. So if two events do not influence each other, they're said to be independent of each other. And if they're independent, the probability that they both happen you get by multiplying their individual probabilities. So the probability of A and B, that part where they overlapped in that Venn diagram, is the product of their two individual probabilities. So here's an example of how you'd use that. 20% of incoming freshmen smoke. And we're going to put freshmen randomly in pairs in dorm rooms. So the assignments are independent of each other. And we're looking at the probability of a match. So probability that they're both smokers or both non-smokers. Well, to get both smokers, you'd have one is a smoker and the second one is a smoker. So you would multiply the probability of being a smoker times the probability of being a smoker. And you get 0.04. And if neither one is a smoker, you'd multiply the probability of not being a smoker, 0.8, times the probability of not being a smoker, 0.8, and get 0.64. So the probability of a match, then, you would add those two, and you'd get 68%, or 0.68. Now the addition rule for disjoint events, don't know what happened to this picture, but that's okay. Probability of A or B is the probability of A plus the probability of B when the events are disjoint. And that's rule number 3 in our 4 probability rules. But that's only for disjoint events, and we want to be able to have a general addition rule that covers all events, disjoint or not. So if you look at it, if you want to know the probability of A or B, well, you want to add up everything that's in A and everything that's in B, but you need to subtract the A and B part out because you've just counted it twice. You counted it when you counted A, and you counted it when you counted B, and you only want to count it once. So you have to add up the two and then subtract out their overlap. Now this is the same for disjoint events, it's just that their overlap is 0, so there's nothing to subtract out. So here's a case study on student demographics. 80% of the students were in-state, 30% were part-time, 20% were both in-state and part-time. So that's where they overlap. The in-state students and the part-time students overlapped there. So if you want to know the probability that a student is either in-state or part-time, you have to add up in-state and part-time and then subtract out their overlap. So it would be 0.8 plus 0.3 minus 0.2, which is 0.9. 90% of the students were either in-state or part-time. Now here you can see it on a Venn diagram, what we just did. Now if you want in-state but not part-time, then you take in-state 0.80 minus the overlap here, minus this part, because you only want what's shaded there with the orange hash marks. Okay, you want to take out the A and B. So it would be minus 0.20 equals 0.60. 60% are full-time in-state students.